part of our Growing Globally campaign to expand our worldwide wash services. I'm excited to know that there's a lot of people joining around the world. We've got people from all over. So however you're tuning in, whether you're live or watching this as a recording, thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of this. I'm excited to see the momentum building around what we're doing at EMI within WASH. My name is Jason Chandler. I'm the Senior Manager of WASH at EMI, and I'm joined today with Matt Chan, who is going to be sharing today on theory of change in WASH. So Matt has a master's degree in civil engineering from the University of Toronto. He was a former intern with EMI and has spent the past 6 months working with our Cambodia office and the WASH team there, working on program strategy and doing some trainings along the lines of behavior change and theory of change. So I asked Matt to join us today and to share on this topic because it's something that's a little bit outside the norm for us as engineers, especially when we start thinking about the WASH. We think about hardware, we think about technologies and the things that are the solutions to maybe those WASH problems, but rarely are those things on their own what leads to transformation. And so there's a lot more human factors that play into that, and so we're going to be getting into a little bit of an intro into that today. And so I'm excited to have Matt join us and share some of his knowledge on this. But let me pray, and I'll get us started, and then Matt can take it on. So, Lord, we love you. We thank you for just the ways that you have allowed EMI to partner with the work that you're doing around the world. And we thank you for the ways that you are growing EMI and expanding our capabilities to serve people that are in need. And so, God, just I pray for every person that's joining today and for this time that it would be useful for us as we grow in our knowledge and in our abilities to serve others and to serve you. We thank you for your involvement in our lives, and we love you, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Take it away, Matt.
Great, thank you, Jason. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today and to be able to talk on this topic. So a little bit of an outline for how I structured this webinar. First, I wanted to start out with a little bit more of adding to this vision that we're building as an organization around WASH and what is the opportunities that we have to partner with God's restoration work. So I'll use a couple of little anecdotes from my time in Cambodia, and then we'll go into the main topic for today, so WASH theory of change, an introduction. So what are we talking about when we're talking about this broad topic? A little bit of a spoiler, right? What we're really talking about here is the science of behavior change, right? So if we want to see lasting health impact, we need to have a plan to address the human factors, as Jason was mentioning. Then I will leave you guys off with a couple different examples. So one good behavior change model, tried and true, it's got some good evidence to back it up that I'll be presenting on, as well as an example application of what this could look like as EMI as an organization starts to step into the sector. So a little bit more, adding on to what Jason said. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. I'm coming to you guys from Toronto, where I studied water engineering and getting involved in some church planting initiatives there. I did my internship in the Cambodia office in T3 of 2022, and it was so nice that I had to do it twice. So I just finished another 6 months there as an associate staff, really spending time with the WASH team, building up the program, and dreaming and visioning of how the Cambodian office can really step into this space well. So it's been a great experience, and I'm really excited to be sharing some of the lessons that we've been learning with you guys here today. So as I said, I wanted to start by diving into a little bit more of the vision behind WASH and what God's doing, right? And so to set the stage, right, when we think about WASH in literature, kind of the main overarching goal of WASH is to reduce the burden of diarrheal diseases on developing communities by improving their access to WASH. Now, when I was in Cambodia, I was able to experience a lot of these contexts firsthand and do some field trips. And there were a lot of things that stuck with me that I want to share and hopefully set a little bit more motivation for what we're talking about here today. One thing that I love about EMI as an organization is through the statement, the vision statement, right? We are partnering in the restoration of what God is doing in people's lives, as well as in their physical context as engineers, architects, and design professionals. It's very important that we're working on the two simultaneously, and I think WASH gives us a great opportunity. The picture that I have on this slide is one that I took on one of my field trips in the rural context of Cambodia. And this one really stuck with me, right? So there's a couple of things that you will notice. This is a household, and this is their water source. It's surface water, right outside of their home. And there's a couple different things that you can see. The first things that caught my eye were the ducks, swimming around in the water. Now, I'm a big fan of ducks, but you don't really want them in your water supply, right? And so that was heartbreaking in some way. The other part was the smaller red circle that I highlighted, which are the family's septic tanks. And so, their latrine is right there, right by the water. And so we know that what's happening is that the liquid waste is going into the ground and contaminating their water. And so as I sat there, just kind of reflecting, I saw the children come out and they started to swim in this water. They started to do their laundry in this water, and I saw them washing their dishes in this water. And that just really kind of hit home. Now, what made it kind of hit more, personally for me, was that I got to partake in a discipleship group in the Cambodian office, where I got to walk alongside some really beloved friends. And one of the guys was sharing how I think growing up, he grew up similarly in a context like this, and he would get sick a lot of the time, ever since he could remember from the age of 3. Now, what that did was that it caused there to be a lot of pressure from his family side, right? His family was kind of going to him and being like, hey, these are all the hospital bills that we had to pay for your health, right? Whenever you get all these diarrheal diseases and all that stuff. And that really did a number on him growing up, right? You can imagine growing up with that kind of pressure, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And so as I was walking alongside this brother who I really loved, and just kind of inviting Jesus into that space of restoration, one thing that I was also holding was just being really curious about his context. As it turns out, long story short, yes, it was a context very similar to this. And the water that his family was using was contaminated with animal waste, right? They were farmers. And so for me, that really highlighted the importance of WASH, right? This is one way that we could really partner well with the work that God is doing, not only to make an impact on communities' lives and well-being, their physical health, but also their spiritual, right? There's a lot of things that we do not see about how these things can play into effect. Another story that really kind of helped me learn more about the importance for theory of change and behavior is another household that I went to visit. And this really sweet Khmer granny, right? We were, surveying and asking her questions, and I noticed that she had a state-of-the-art water membrane filter. And I was impressed, and I was like, wow, Granny, where did you get this kind of thing? That's really cool. She said it was donated to her by a church, which was wonderful, of course. But as a WASH engineer, I was kind of interested, so I dug a bit more. And I was like, well, Granny, can you tell me a little bit more about how you maintain your water filter? How do you use it? And what I found was that she had no information on how to maintain it. She was using it every day, but with membrane filters like this, you need to backwash it with clean water to sustain proper usage. Again, that broke my heart, and so I asked her, they didn't give her any instructions, and she said no, there was no instruction. She hadn't washed it for months. But upon further engagement, she was like, you know what, they actually did give me a package of stuff that I don't know how to use. So she goes out into her home and comes back with this really nice plastic bag with all of the maintain and clean the filter, pictures, all that stuff. The problem was the instructions were in English. She didn't understand, and so she didn't know. And so for me, this is just another small example of how when we're talking about WASH, right, interventions that focus on the physical, that's only one part of the story, right? Let's talk about the human factors. The last one that I want to share is, again, on a field trip, and we went to this community. You know, we, in the water resources engineering side, we kind of think of this goal of having piped water, clean piped water as what we're all working towards. Now here's a family that recently got access to clean piped water. Yet when we asked them about their usage, they weren't using it. Instead, they were buying bottled water from the store at a relatively more expensive rate. And so we were questioning, we're like, okay, well, tell us a little bit more about that. So what is the motivation behind that? They said, well, it's cheaper, isn't it? And we said, well, what makes you think that? And they said, well, all we know is that the company is, you know, the piped water company, they're charging us based on every cubic meter of water that we use. And we scratched our head, we're like, well, you're buying 2-liter bottles of clean water for the same price as 1 cubic meter. The problem was that they didn't understand what a cubic meter was, right? To them, a cubic meter could be the size of an ice cube, right, for all we know. And so we had to really come alongside and just kind of be like, hey, like this is why this is more economical, right? And so if we miss these human factors, it doesn't matter what kind of physical solution we can bring if they don't use it. So I left the Cambodian WASH team with this saying that I just continue to love, right? It doesn't matter if we bring clean water if they don't use it, right? There's no point. Yeah, I think this point kind of hits home in the research that the WASH community has done over the past couple decades, right? Where we're starting to learn different ways and different applications to get to the deeper understanding of what drives behavior, of what drives people's habits. And we're finding that these are the things that we really need to focus on when we're talking about bringing health impact in the sector of WASH, okay? And so, hopefully at this point, I've done some work in motivating us on why this really should be the main focus versus just the hardware side. And so with that, let's start to understand a little bit more about behavior, right, as we're trying to endeavor into changing that. Now, I love this graphic by a study by Wood and Neal that highlights a couple different points of what is going on in the science of behavior. So behavior can be classified as having two main components. First, it starts with the intentional actions, conscious, deliberate decisions. Now, over time, as we repeat these behaviors in a stable context and with stable reward, they become habit. Now, what are the different characteristics of these two processes? Right, the first main difference is that they take parts in different places of the brain. That should say something on how we need to think about this. So conscious, deliberate thought, it takes place in the prefrontal cortex, whereas habit gets stored deeper in the brain. Some other features of the intentional thoughts, right, we can talk about this in the sense of intentional action, is that it's guided by attitudes, goals, values. It's very conscious, it's very deliberate. And it's performed in a relatively slow manner compared to habit. You know, example of this is if we talk about when we were kids and we were learning how to brush our teeth. I'm sure all of us has spent time, you know, thinking, okay, I need to spend 1 minute here, 1 minute there, right? We need to think about it. It's not habit yet. Now what happens is that over time, we continue this behavior and it gets stored in a different part of our brain. Now what are the differences? Habits are no longer defined and guided by attitudes, goals, values. Instead, what they're really guided by is context cues or triggers. We think about brushing our teeth today. We don't need to think about it. That's the point. We wake up, right? That's the cue. We just walk into the washroom, we start brushing our teeth. While we're brushing our teeth, we're probably thinking about what we're going to do at work that day, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? It's less conscious, it's more automatic, and it doesn't necessarily require thought or attention. Now, what is the ramifications or consequences of this? Well, what happens if we try to design a program, for example, in WASH, that maybe doesn't address the habits, purely just the behavior? We might expect to see, okay, we go into a community, we help out with some of the physical environment change, we bring some wells or something like that, and we have a really good process to empower the community, provide ownership, provide education, and then we leave. That might not be enough, right? You can think of it as like a New Year's resolution. Maybe we've given them a Fitbit or something to right, encourage. But over time, if we don't address and have a strategy for focusing on habits as well as behavior, it might get lost, right? There might be a lot of relapse, and people might have the thought of, well, I've tried it, and I didn't see any health benefits. Therefore, what does that run the risk? That runs the risk that we've reinforced the idea that WASH is not a priority in their lives, right? Health benefits in WASH, they take a long time to materialize or to notice. And so if there's this relapse, then we've potentially set ourselves back. So, after having talked a little bit about the science of behavior, how then do we, as design professionals, attempt to get into this design space? How do we try and show our due diligence? We can use what is called behavior change theory, right? So I've talked about in WASH, when we're talking about theory of change, what we're really trying to get at is behavior change. Behavior change theories are tools from psychology that we as design professionals can then attempt to apply into our programming, into our work. And what they're really trying to help us do is to provide a structured way of understanding what is affecting this context's behaviors as well as their habits, and how can we as people that would like to empower them, how can we walk alongside them to really encourage behavior that would lead to health benefits? They are theories that essentially they're proposing different factors that drive intentions, right? And what context cues drive habits. And yeah, the goal is for us to be able to utilize these to, again, to show our due diligence, to show that we're doing our best to consider the human factors and lead to a high probability of seeing this behavior expressed. As I've talked about in the previous slide, I want to just reiterate that there are some behavior change methods that stopped just at the behavior side, just at the intentions side. How do we design an intervention that targets interventions? But we cannot stop there, right? We also need to have a strategy to form habits. So I'll talk a little bit more about a model that I'd like to present on in a second, but I just also wanted to set a bit of groundwork for examples of how we can use these models from psychology in our programs. So to get more specific, what we can use these theories or models to help us do is to analyze and form inferences on a community's behavior based on internal and external factors. Now that will help us a lot, and that can help us in many different ways. Essentially, we're trying to answer the questions: what is motivating their behavior? How do we understand the context cues? And that will shape how we approach designing our surveys, how we design our education campaigns, our marketing campaigns. It will inform the physical solutions that we might present to the community, okay? So essentially, it's giving us just a structured way to incorporate all these different aspects into our program. So as I said, I'm now going to present on a behavior change model called RANIS, and I'll break down what that means in a second. That is a fairly well documented and evidence-based model that we see in WASH, because there are hundreds out there, right? There are hundreds, of these models out there, and I wanted to give you guys a nicely packaged one to get our foot in the door. So, RANIS. RANIS is an acronym, and it's a behavior change model created by a guy named Mosler in 2015. Stands for risks, attitudes, norms, ability, and self-regulation factors. Okay? And so, to set a little bit of expectations for our applications of behavior change theories like this, my professor would he would have this quote he got elsewhere that I loved. He said, all models are wrong, but some are helpful, right? And so that's ultimately the expectation I want to lay. Think of the models of the atom that we learned in high school. Is it completely correct? Definitely not. But is it helpful to form an understanding? Yes, I would argue yes. And so when we use these behavior change models, we cannot come into our context thinking, hey, because I've used this model, therefore behavior change is going to happen. No, what we're ultimately doing is just giving ourselves the best foundation to give us the best chances of and the most sustainable way of doing this kind of work. So going back to the model, this one is a very helpful structure that I found that leverages many different psychological, behavior change models and communicates them in a way that is more tailored for the WASH context. So let's get into what they are proposing. So this visual is from the organization's website, okay, the RANIS model of behavior change, and it has a couple different components, right? As I said before, behavior change models, ultimately what they're doing is they're proposing components or behavioral factors that are going to be key in changing behavior. So the first part is the 5 behavioral factors that they propose are key components in a context expression of behavior. The first one is risk factors. Okay, so risk factors they are proposing is comprised of a person's factual knowledge towards a health behavior, a person's perceived vulnerability towards this, the benefits of this health behavior, and a severity, right? What is their perceived severity towards consequences of perhaps not doing this health behavior? Now they also propose a corresponding behavior change technique that we can use to address this factor. So to propose, to increase a person's risk factor, they would propose doing an information campaign. Okay, so presenting facts, running education, teaching people why it's good to adopt a new health behavior. The second factor is attitudes. What is a person's positive or negative stance towards a behavior? What is that comprised of? What is their personal beliefs about the costs and the benefits, as well as what is their personal feelings? Do they actually care? Right? We cannot take these things for granted. How can we influence attitude behaviors then? It's proposed that we would use persuasion techniques. We would run a cost-benefit analysis or try to encourage people to study that. We would design rewards to motivate a context. We would prompt them to talk to others, role models, etc. Right? These are all things that we can do to influence. The third factor is norms. Okay, so social norms. What is the perceived social pressure towards a behavior that we're trying to encourage? And that is comprised of what is the behavior of their context around them. What are their friends doing? What are their families doing? What are their leaders doing? Then it goes into what is their context's approval or disapproval towards a said behavior, as well as personal norms. Do they care about what their context is doing? Are they more caring about their own personal norms, right? To address this, we would then use norm-enhancing techniques. So doing our best to increase awareness towards their community's behaviors. We would maybe do some sort of public commitment campaigns, find ways to increase social pressure, encourage group identity, and set further role models. These are different techniques that we could use. The fourth factor then is ability. So the organization Ranis, they're proposing that a person's confidence in their ability to practice a behavior is very important and very significant into whether or not they will actually practice this behavior. Right? That's comprised of action knowledge. For example, if we are trying to teach someone how to brush their teeth, are they confident that they have the right technique down? Right? Are they confident in continuation? Do they think that they could remember the steps of how to brush your teeth, for example? And what we could do to encourage this is to what they would call enabling techniques. So provide further instruction. This is where infrastructure can come in. Can we provide some infrastructure to lower barriers? Can we provide an organized training and support to really empower these communities? And the final factor that they propose are key in understanding behavior is self-regulation. What is a person's ability to plan, to self-monitor their behavior? What is their ability to manage conflicting goals and bad habit cues within their context? Okay, so what is this comprised of? Again, it's action planning. Are they able to provide those steps and set a good plan for themselves? Do they have good strategies to deal with the barriers that will come up? For example, if we're trying to bring clean water and we're proposing a ceramic filter solution, are they confident that they know where to buy it when they need a new filter? Stuff like that. How do we help them, or how do we empower people in this context? We can help them with planning techniques, right? We can encourage them to set schedules and to at least have a game plan of knowing, right, where their supply might come from, for example. We can discuss what it's like for them to cope with these barriers that they're facing, and we can help them strengthen their commitment towards behavior change. Now, the model then proposes that we need to understand, and these are the factors that we could influence then to get what we would like to see, which is the behavioral outcomes. And there are three components towards these behavioral outcomes that is defined: intention, use, and habit. So if we use an example of, we would like to see a community start to use clean water instead of dirty water. Well, what is within that? There's, first of all, the behavior that we want to see expressed. We can call that behavior A. We want to see people using clean water. At the same time, we want to see less of what we can call behavior B. We want to see people using less dirty water. Okay? And the three components in behavior is intention. Do people actually want to use the clean water? Do they actually want to stop using the dirty water? The actual practice use, so are we observing people drinking clean water and drinking less of dirty water? And then finally, importantly, the habits. Are people practicing this behavior in a stable context such that it's becoming habit over the months, over the years? Okay, so these are the outcomes that we want to see. And finally, they address that there are contextual external factors, perhaps, that we also need to study up on when we go into these contexts. The first is the social, right? We need to have a firm understanding as best as we can of the cultural and social relations, right? The laws, the policies, the economic conditions, the information environment of a community that we would like to empower and to partner, walk alongside with. Then there's the physical context, okay? So this is more of what we might be used to when we think of what is their physical environment. Do they have access to clean water? Do they have access to proper sanitation, proper hygiene? What is the natural and built environment? And then finally, it's more of the personal context, right? So what is their personal demographics? Age, gender, education, mental, physical health, all these things are important for us to understand as well. Okay, and so with the presentation on this model being complete, so then how do we apply this into a design program, into a WASH program? Well, the organization has presented their version of a theory of change that I thought was a really good example of what it might look like to apply behavior change. Okay? So this is the RANIS approach. A couple different phases that we can walk through. First, they would propose that their organization would go through their exploration phase. Okay, so going into a context and really trying to discern what is the behavior that we could really influence here. Is it clean water? Is that a big need? Is it the sanitation? Is it the hygiene, for example? After going through this phase, the expected output then would be a proper solid definition of what the behavioral factors that we would like to influence could be. Then we would then go into a measuring phase. So, if we were to start to get into these projects, that would look like going into these contexts and doing surveys, starting our baseline analyses, okay, using quantitative questionnaires to help us understand how is this behavior currently being expressed, and so we can set a foundation for where we can help to progress. Okay, so collecting data on behaviors, factors, contexts, and this is where, again, having that theory of behavior change can really come into handy, right? As we design our surveys, what are the questions that we're asking? Okay, well, based on RANIS, we would start to design our questions strategically, right? We would start to think, how do we assess a context's risk factors, for example? How do we understand their norm factors, all these things? Okay? So at the end of this phase, what we would ideally like to have as an output is quantitative data on behaviors, on demographics, on context, all these wide things, and that we can come back, right, into our office and then perform our analysis. Now, within the RANIS worlds, they call it the doer or non-doer analysis, and essentially what we would do is then compare the data between the people that are already performing this behavior, for example, drinking clean water, and compare that to the data of the people that are not. Right? When we do this kind of rigorous analysis, ideally what would happen is a couple of different things may get highlighted for us. We then might be able to see, hey, with this specific community, with this specific context, what we're finding is that there's a huge difference between the risk factors per se, between the people that are drinking clean water and the people who are not. What does that tell us as an organization? This can be one of our focuses, right? Okay, so again, at the end of this step, what we would really hope to have is a couple of the different behavioral factors highlighted, right, flagged, and as a team can then say, okay, we're going to pay special attention as we're planning our behavior change intervention. Then we can get into the fun work, okay, so designing a behavior change campaign, and there's tons of great resources and tools or examples of things that have been done in the past, okay, and so trainings on education campaigns, on habit building strategies, tons of great stuff. And again, we would use models like RANIS to evaluate these different techniques. Right? For example, if we went with an education campaign, we would then be asking ourselves, okay, based on what we've learned about what is informing behavior, what kind of messaging do we think is really going to resonate with this community? There was one study that I read that was trying to encourage helmet wearing in Australia. And they were, so for one of their strategies, they really leaned in to the parents. And their strategy was to educate on the potential consequences or health risks for their kids, because they realized that that would be really something that resonates with the parents, right? So at the end of our design phase, ideally we would like to have a plan, timeline for, okay, this is what it's going to look like when we engage with a community. We're going to go in, we're going to talk to their leadership, we're going to get the leadership's blessing. Hopefully that's going to encourage the social norms of the context, for example. We're going to then go in and help them with the physical barriers. Maybe that looks like empowering the locals to drill wells, right? Stuff like that. Then provide the education campaign for how to maintain the well, all these things, right? So ideally by the end of the stage, we would have a plan for how we as an organization would like to influence their behavior and their habits. Then we get to the groundwork, going into the context, and this is where I think us as an organization can really thrive, and we can learn so much from just being there, and to partner with the restoration work, again on the physical front, but as we build relationships to really get in on the ground level and partner with what God is doing in their hearts. So all really exciting stuff. So again, implement this behavior change within the context, and then finally finish off with an evaluation. So maybe our campaign lasts a couple years, right? Then we would then like to go back and to quantify and try to quantify the change from the entire campaign and compare it to the baseline, right? And the questions that we'll be asking ourselves at this point is what worked and what didn't work? And more importantly, why, right? And how do we answer the why? Again, that is, we can use a structure like behavior change theory to make inferences on why something either worked or did not, okay? And so this is an example of a theory of change for WASH laid by the RANIS organization that I think is a really strong starting point for EMI as we're just getting our foot into the door for these types of projects, for these initiatives. I think it sets a really strong foundation for us to lean on. Now, with that being said, the expectations is that what I'm kind of doing here is I'm presenting to you guys something like a MacBook PC, right? Something that's really fresh, works right out of the box. It's got all the components nicely lined up. Is it going to be applicable for every context? Maybe not, right? But will it be hopefully applicable for many of the contexts? Hopefully, okay? The hope is that as our offices start to delve into this space, we'll then be able to start to learn the other parts of behavior change, the underlying parts. That's what I was able to run through with my friends at Petrum. So you guys got the fortunate shorter version of that. Okay. So I just want to run through a quick case study to highlight an example of how RANIS, this behavior change theory, and their theory of change was applied in a context and what they saw. Okay. So I took a case study from a study of the RANIS organization that was seeking to encourage hand washing in rural Ethiopia. Okay, so the goal to apply this approach to improve the behavior. And so what did it look like for this case? Well, to kind of shorten it a little bit, they went through the exploration, measuring, and analysis phase. And what did that look like? Well, for them, it looked like going around and doing household community surveys as a strong start, right? And again, these surveys are designed using principles from behavior change theory. Now, after a broad survey campaign, they then had the qualitative and quantitative behavior and demographic data to perform their doer and non-doer analysis. What they found in this case was that the things that were highlighted for hand washing were the social norms, were the physical barriers. So this context did not have a lot of hygiene infrastructure. Okay. Forgetfulness was a factor that they found. So people were just forgetful. How long do I wash my hands for again? Or they're just not used to it, so they'll just forget to wash their hands. And then finally, the hand washing knowledge, right? So again, it's like, okay, right, I need to remember I need to use soap. I need to, scrub for 15 seconds, for example, and so on and so forth. Don't contaminate the water that I'm using, for example, okay? After these factors are highlighted, then we can focus our efforts, right? So for them, they said, okay, now we know what to target. Let's go into our behavior change techniques, right? A lot of great resources again, a lot of good catalogs. Let's run education campaigns, okay? And that will target the hand washing knowledge factor. Let's get into public commitment campaigns to encourage the community's sense of social norms, to help them not to forget, right? let's get in on the infrastructure level, right? And maybe this would be music to our ears as engineers, like, oh yeah, infrastructure, okay, we can do that. We know how to do that well. How do we lower these infrastructure barriers? How do we design good hand washing facilities for a context like this? And ultimately incorporate this entire behavior change intervention to see the change. Okay, so the evaluation went well. They ran another study 3 months after the whole intervention, and they found that 50 to 80% of the households had maintained hand washing behavior. That's great, right? But again, as an organization, let's come back and hold a little bit of a critique. 3 months is a fairly short time, okay? So us as an organization, maybe we'd like to come back a year later, right? Year and a half later, and to see if habits are being formed. That's what we'd really like to see, okay? So to end off, to kind of summarize the main points, we started out with an introduction. What is theory of change, right? So a theory of change is just an explicit way of structuring what kind of change we want to see and how we're going to propose we're going to get there. Then in the sector of WASH, hopefully I've convinced us that what we're really talking about, if we want to see health impact, is changing behaviors. It is a higher priority than just the physical environment, and it must be the focus. Okay? From there, we talked about specifically WASH, theory of change. We talked about the science of how behavior works and how we really need to develop strategies for not only targeting intentions, which may have been a traditional route, but also thinking about strategies for habits. Finally, we talked about RANIS as a really good, reputable behavior change model for us to really get into the sector, get our foot into the door, as well as what is, very high level examples of what it could look like to apply a behavior change theory like RANIS into our programming. And so with that, I would like to thank you guys for the time and for the intention. Couple of my references, so I reference RANIS a lot, as well as some of their studies. And yeah, it's been a great pleasure to present to you guys today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. It's been really good. I was just on a call yesterday with our Alaska team and talking through some hand washing stations that were installed in homes and seeing how the behavior had not been modified. Like they were still using a wash basin and reusing water and just that those challenges exist even when you are putting forth the effort to do that. You still have to. There's a continual monitoring and piece of that you have to be intentional about. And so that it just probed a lot of things in my mind as you were talking through that. So I appreciate you joining and sharing this with us. So wanted to give a few next steps for anyone that's joining, just ways that you can get involved with EMI and what we're doing within WASH. First of all, you can pray. We covet your prayers. We need your prayers. There's the things that God is calling us to are bigger than ourselves and bigger than EMI as an organization. And so we want to know that God is going before us and behind us and all of that. And so we ask that you pray for the growth of EMI and the work that we're doing and the opportunities, the projects, the resources and all of that go into the work that we're doing to partner with God in these restoration things. So yes, pray for us. You can also go. I mean, there's these webinars are kind of an entry point of knowing what is going on within EMI and within WASH as we develop this and as we grow and some of the things that we're thinking through and wrestling with. And so if you haven't checked out our previous webinar, we did one back in March that covered some of the vision and mission behind why we're getting into WASH and community development. So check out that recording. This one will be available as well for anybody that wants to check it out again and really dive into some of this stuff. And then we've got other webinars coming up. There's more details that'll be coming out soon on that.
The next one's in July, so be ready for information coming out on that one soon. We'll be talking about community engagement, and so kind of getting into the nuts and bolts of how you get into a community and do that well. And so another thing you can do is come to Colorado in September. We have our Faith and Work event. That we would be excited to have you come join us and get to know us, and we can get to know you and learn more about EMI and the ways that you can get engaged. So that's September 20th and 21st. If you wanted to join us here in Colorado Springs, the registration for that should be getting up on the webpage soon. So be sure to check that out and join us here. We'd love to see you. Other ways you can go, there's project trips. There's ways that you can volunteer in an office. You can spend time with our staff, or if you're interested in interning or being a fellow or joining staff, we will need people to do this well. And so if you're considering that, if that's something that's been on your heart. For sure, we'd love to have you, join us in this effort. And then the last thing that we ask is that you give. I mean, we're trying to raise $500,000 for our Growing Globally campaign that will help us be able to do these things and to grow our capacities in our different offices and around the world. And so we need the funding to do that, and we need the resources to make it happen. There is a QR code on the screen that will take you straight to our Growing Globally giving page if you wanted to get to that. We know that God's going to bring the resources, and we know that our network is that you are always supporting in what we're doing, and so we appreciate the ways that you connect with us and support our work. So with that, we've got a few minutes left in our time that we're gonna take some questions from the chat. If anybody has a question for Matt and wants to ask that, you can write that in the chat, or we can take some questions in the room as well if there's questions.
Exactly that. How do we come into these communities well? How do we make sure so that we're not coming in kind of as these heroes and as these kind of foreign influences, but instead coming in very humbly and kind of saying, hey, here are the tools that we have at our disposal. How could we help you reach your vision, your goals? And so hopefully those align in the aspect of WASH. But yeah, there's tons of great thought that must be put into the cultural and social context. The problem is it's not going to be the same, right, across the board. I can speak on behalf of what I've seen in Asia. So something, for example, that's really important is getting the blessing from the provincial, different district levels of authority. And how do we make sure that they kind of, in a sense, feel like they're the ones running the...
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
We had an audio issue, and
Okay.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Okay.
Because it was missed.
Okay,
by the
please,
audience.
yeah.
So it's, do you know what are some of the common issues or barriers other WASH organizations have come across in trying to change behaviors, culturally appropriate communication, and distrust of outsiders?
Great, yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. So just continuing on, I think some of the barriers that we could see is simply authorities might just say no, right? That's always the risk. Or communities will have the wrong way of looking at it and kind of be expecting donations or long-lasting support or just free stuff, right? And that's stuff that we as organizations would really have to say no to, right? That's not our role. So I think if I put it generally, that's some of the high-level things that we might see, but tons of other nitty-gritty stuff within each context for sure.
Yeah, I think even the example you had about the granny who was using the filter, I'm sure the people that gave her the filter thought they had communicated, how to maintain it, how to, what needed to be done, but, that was just a bag of things that she didn't know what to do with and in language that she didn't understand. And so, so there's those type barriers of where you feel like you might have communicated something, but it's not been even in the right language or, or just in a way that something's understood. So.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Any questions from the room? Great. Well, thanks again, Matt, for joining. This has been really helpful for me, I know, and as we dive into doing more WASH, more community development within our offices, it's going to be something that we're going to continue to be exploring further and further into that space and developing partnerships with organizations who are in that space as well, because we know that we can partner with others and use their strengths and our strengths together to do great things. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how some of those things line up and different opportunities within the WASH space, but something that we really have to wrestle with and understand ourselves and not just come at it from a solution, a hardware solution. We really need to be thinking about those human factors and pieces of that. And so yeah, I'm just real excited to see us as an organization grow in that, and I appreciate you joining us and helping us with learning in this space. So thank you very much. Yeah.